Whatever your background, welcome to this. Perhaps I should have said, my name is Kevin Marsh. I'm a senior advisor at the AS. And I really don't have much more to say about it than that. Many of you will be familiar with Bactivac, some of you won't. I think it's a really important network, particular importance right now, and a real importance to the whole African continent. So with that very brief introduction, I'm going to hand over to Cal and just encourage people to put any questions they have as it goes along into the Q&A, and then Cal will pick them up at the end. So I do encourage everybody to ask questions and to write them into the Q&A, and we'll pick them up at the end. So with that, welcome, Cal.
Hopefully that's there. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this morning. Thank you to Kevin and the African Academy of Sciences and ASA for hosting. I'd just like to start with, just as a slight preamble, say that Kevin was instrumental in bringing me to Africa and giving me the opportunity to see the problems of global health firsthand. And this was about 22 years ago, back just before the turn of the millennium in Kilifi, Kenya. And it really changed the whole direction of my career afterwards. So thank you, Kevin, and thank you for this opportunity. So I'm going to spend the next around half an hour talking about the Bactivac Network, taking you through a presentation. And at the end of that, there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers. Right. So Bactivac, what is the need? Why do we have a Bactivac network? Well, I'm sure I don't need to say this to people in Africa, where bacterial infections are a real cause of high cause of morbidity or mortality. Around 5 million people die each year from bacterial infections. And for many of these bacterial infections of global health significance, there aren't vaccines at the present time. And I'm thinking of diseases like invasive non-typhoidal salmonella disease, group amongst others. There's an increasing problem with antimicrobial resistance, which I'm sure those listening will be aware of as well, with indiscriminate use of antibiotics to treat fevers, infections without a diagnosis present. And if we can have prevention as better than cure, then vaccines have to be a good solution to that. There are proven strategies for bacterial vaccines. We have some fantastic vaccines against meningococcus, against pneumococcus and Hib, and those have been rolled out in Africa as well as elsewhere globally. And then in terms of the expertise to see bacterial vaccines move through, there's expertise in the UK, but also recognizing this from having worked myself in LMICS, in those LMICS, in the places where the diseases actually happen, and globally. And I think it's something I remember Richard Adekbola saying at a meeting 10 or so years ago. He's from Nigeria and Kenya, and he said, you know, it's just so important to involve people from low middle income countries, people from where those diseases actually occur in vaccine development, right from the start, from the get-go, and not waiting till a vaccine is there and available. There's no existing bacterial vaccine network, or at least there wasn't when we set up Bactivac. And so we saw an obvious gap in relation to setting up a network. And this seemed to contrast at the time and even now with the situation for vaccines against viral and outbreak pathogens, for which there are a number of different bodies, including CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Pandemic Innovations. So we really felt there was a lack of any network to deal with bacterial vaccines, and that was one of the main drivers for setting this up, as well as the threat of antimicrobial resistance, and that potentially causing a future pandemic, but albeit a rather more silent one than what we've seen with COVID. So what's our mission? Well, it's essentially to help promote and help move vaccines against bacterial infections along the vaccine pipeline, and not just vaccines against any bacterial infections, but against those with particular relevance to low and middle income countries. So this really is from a global health standpoint. And how we've wanted to do this is by creating a sustainable network for Vaccine Network, and to have these different components come together, have academia and industry, individuals in low and middle income countries as well as high income countries, and policymakers too, because essentially policy is going to be important for implementation of vaccines. We have, as well as setting up the network, we've set up Catalyst projects and training funding to help people get a first foot on the ladder in terms of sort of training and skills, but also to start doing small projects to allow data, to allow substantive funding applications to go ahead. We also exist to attract investment and leverage further funding for low and middle income countries, and from the UK, most of this has come. And we feel it's very important to have advocacy for the development of bacterial vaccines. So if we just look at the pipeline for vaccine development as a whole, from exploratory over to the left to the marketing over to the right, we really see ourselves as being involved right the way through, but perhaps our sweet spot is the focus between the preclinical to the clinical, which is often called the valley of death, or even the first valley of death in vaccine development. And this is where we focus a lot of our pump prime catalyst funding. And this is where we have back-to-back training, although this can spread right through the range of the vaccine pipeline. And we're really keen to have LMIC involvement throughout this as well. And this is why it's so good to have the opportunity to speak to you today. So we were established in August 2017. So we've been going now for some 3.5 years. So what have we achieved? Well, if I just look at governance to start with, we have an overarching network advisory board of people you may have heard of. Brian Greenwood, who chairs this, Kate O'Brien, who is one of the directors in WHO now, Richard Adikbola, who I've mentioned already, who's from Nigeria, who did work in MRC Gambia, has also worked for Gates and GSK, and Samir Sahar from Bangladesh. Then we have quite a large network management oversight board. A lot of these, being a UK-based network, are from the UK, but we've thought it really important to have people on that board from low and middle income countries. And in terms of those from Africa, some of you may know Faith Ozia, Professor Faith Ozia. She's currently in Germany, but she's originally from Kenya. There is also Roma Chilengi from Zambia, and Jeanette Wilson from South Africa. So we have this large network management oversight board. We have representation from industry as well as academia and policy there as well. There's Birgit Giersing from WHO there too. And then we have the sort of rather tighter network operations management group. And this is the group that does the heavy lifting in terms of the administration, or rather I should say those in the purple do the heavy lifting, and they're led by Jo Dean as the network operations manager, and she has a small group with Evelina, who's on the line, and Susan and Jenny Needham here. And we have recently appointed to the position of a communications officer. And I work closely with the co-director, Adam Cunningham, who's full-time based in Birmingham as well. And we have another couple of from Birmingham, Matt O'Shea and Willem, who are academics and clinicians there. So we've been going for 3.5 years. We really didn't know how this would go when we started, but what I hope this bar chart shows is that we've had quite a rapid expansion in terms of our membership from the start. We're over 1,000 members, have been for some time now. But I think beyond just the numbers, what's particularly pleasing is the spread across different countries that Bactivac has had. So we've got spread across 75 different countries. And I think if you just look at that map of the world there, you'll see a whole load of those pointers over the African continent, which is great. And in fact, in terms of our total membership, we're just under 50% of our members are from low and middle income countries. One area that we'd like to see more growth in, that we have a limited involvement in at the moment, is industry. That's 13% of our members. However, that 13% is spread across a large number of vaccine manufacturers, particularly manufacturers in developing countries and members of what's called the DCVMN, the Developing Country Vaccine Manufacturers Network. And I think all of us who've been involved in vaccine, whether it be in academia or otherwise, know that it's all important to have that connection with industry to see vaccines move forward. So in terms of building our following and building our network, as well as the numbers, it's been important to get our messages out. We have a very active Twitter line with 1,500 followers. We have our members directory, and this is very useful if you're looking as a member for someone else who's got skills that you're after. You can go searching for skills on that website. So, and that's a closed directory just for members of the directory of the network to interface with each other. We issue newsletters every couple of months, which has a good open and read rate. And in terms of the institute within which we're embedded at the University of Birmingham, we're responsible for over half their website traffic. So we have a good web presence, which I'm very pleased about. Now, I think one of our major roles, as I've mentioned already, is on the funding side of things. And this is Catalyst funding, and this is funding of around about £50,000 per project, for projects typically lasting just 6 months in time. So these are small, discrete projects which we hope to then allow investigators to develop data to get results, allowing them to apply for substantive funding, whether it be from Gates or Wellcome or wherever else. These are the different investigators who we've been funded so far, and just looking at the pictures, you'll see the demographics. There are a few in here who are African. There are some from low middle income countries, and this is something that we really want to be supporting more of. We want more of these Catalyst funding grants to be going to principal investigators from developing countries, and particularly those who are early stage researchers too, so that we can help promote the careers of those individuals. In terms of the funding that we set off with, we were funded by UKRI, the UK Research Institutes, particularly the Medical Research Council and Biotechnology and Biological Sciences Research Council. And this was under the umbrella of what's called the GCRF, the Global Challenges Research Fund, and it's part of the UK government's commitment to overseas development assistance, something that I very regrettably hear has recently been cut. And we're waiting to see the outfall from that. But up till recently, the UK had pledged 0.7% of its gross domestic product to go to international development, and that's something, a figure that we'd very much like to see the government commit to again in the future. As well as the funding that we've had from UKRI, just over £2 million, we've attracted additional funding from government, from the Industry Strategic Challenge Fund, but most importantly from the Department of Health and Social Care, who've taken a really keen interest on antimicrobial resistance, and have been given us funding through an organisation called GAMRA, the Global AMR Innovation Fund. And then we've had small additional pockets of funding from the Gates Foundation and from actually within the University of Birmingham as well. So starting out at just over £2 million funding, we've leveraged that to have just under 4 million total. And that, of course, enables us to do more and to fund more projects. But I think in terms of the projects, what's been really exciting is to see how, by awarding small pots of funding to individuals in these Catalyst projects, we've then seen that objective reached of leveraging external funding for follow-on work. And out of the 40 projects awarded so far, 29 of those have been completed. We've awarded just over half of our budget, total budget, to these awards. We've had leveraged funding actually within those awards themselves, where we've had investigators and supervisors' times rolled in. That's brought in an extra 77%. But the really important part here is this bottom figure, where the substantive follow-on funding that data from these awards has allowed to be attracted is now over £12 million. So that's a huge 600% uplift on what we started with. And that was exactly what we intended our Catalyst funding to achieve. We see training as something that's important. It's something that perhaps we take for granted in the UK and in high-income countries. So we've been running a number of online training courses with trainers who are really very much trained and equipped to give generic skills in relation to grant writing, project management, and other similar generic bases that are needed to be covered to be successful working in science and in research and in vaccines. Participation is particularly geared to individuals from low and middle income countries. We have a competitive process. This isn't these are very much interactive online training courses that we've been having during the pandemic. So it's not just a case of having a webinar and having as many people join as want to. So we keep the numbers pretty limited. Again, the majority of individuals have been from low and middle income countries, which again is exactly what we wanted. In terms of advocacy, we think it's really important to have a voice to speak out for the need for bacterial vaccines. And I think it's probably just worth mentioning at this point that, as I'm sure those of you who've been working in bacterial vaccines and studying their epidemiology in Africa will be aware, these are often silent killers. So you often don't know what someone has died from unless you have the blood cultures to prove it's a bacterial infection, or the stool cultures if it's a diarrheal bacterial infection. So these silent pandemics which are going on, which the high-income countries aren't aware of, is something that we really want to make known. We want to have a voice for that. And so we've taken the opportunities where we have them to speak in organisations like the British Society of Immunology. We've had involvement in the UK government. We've been asked to attend WHO meetings. And we just try and use our social media outlets as well to publicise the need for bacterial vaccines, but also to promote others who are working in this area and inform the network and others about what is going on, what opportunities there are. This is just a slide from an award that we won a couple of years ago, the Antibiotic Guardian Awards, and this is again just perhaps relates back to one of our reasons for setting up the network, the issue of antimicrobial resistance, and the fact that this is now increasingly seen, that vaccines are increasingly seen as a means by which antimicrobial resistance can be combated. So that is just where we have come from so far. Where are we going now? We currently have funding through to August 2022. We're already making plans, as you can imagine, for sustaining the network and to have follow-on funding to keep us going. So part of the reason for having this call, this webinar today with the African Academy of Sciences, was to encourage those of you who haven't heard about this or have thought about the network to join the network. The membership is free. You have access to Catalyst project funding and training funding. You have access to the members directory and to our virtual events. One of the things I haven't mentioned so far about the network is our annual network meetings. We've had 2 of these so far held in person. They've both been at the University of Birmingham. We've awarded travel bursaries to a number of low middle income country members, particularly those as early stage researchers. We were planning last year to have our first overseas annual network meeting, which was going to be in Kenya, in Kilifi. Unfortunately, that had to be postponed due to the COVID pandemic. And at the moment, we're looking at holding that next year in spring of 2022. But in the meantime, we have our annual network meeting for this year occurring virtually from the University of Birmingham at the end of April. And there are lots of opportunities for networking and for partnership and for career growth within the network. So I've mentioned already that we have a virtual annual network conference coming up at the end of April. Those are the dates. Bacterial vaccines in a time of pandemic is the theme. This is going to be delivered online as a virtual meeting, although a number of us will actually be gathering in person in Birmingham who are able to within COVID lockdown rules. And this is free for members to attend. So again, a great reason to join the Bactivac Network. We are currently have a call open for the 5th round of pump priming projects, and these have a submission deadline of 16th of May this year, so there's still time to join the network and to put in an application for this. So there's over 2 months till the end of the network, till the end of the call. The target and what we like to fund is particularly in this preclinical clinical bottleneck, which I've mentioned earlier, and also diseases with an antimicrobial resistance relevance. The idea is to, within this funding, within these Catalyst funding awards, to generate new partnerships between different members within the network. There has to be a UK partner because the funding has come from the UK, but that partner does not need to be the lead by any means. And we give a special uplift to proposals that come from low and middle income countries. We give a special uplift to those that involve earlier stage researchers who haven't necessarily had funding before, and to those that involve industry as well. So this isn't an instance where people should be put off because they feel they're going to be competing against those with greater resources or greater background knowledge from high income countries. This is something that we really want to encourage our low middle income country members to apply for. And as mentioned earlier, we typically give £50,000 for up to 6 months of work. One area that we've have open, but actually surprisingly has a limited number of successful applications to, or even applications to, is the Catalyst Training Awards. These are typically £6,000 for 3 months. These really are for projects where an individual will be coming hopefully from a low middle income country to another institution where another member within the network is based, to basically learn new skills. And we very much encourage a bilateral exchange where the member from UK or elsewhere goes to the low middle income country as well. And the idea here is not to award funding for people to attend meetings. There's usually plenty of bursaries at meetings that are targeted to global health. This is really to help address skill gaps for individuals from low middle income countries, where they can be met by going and have a distinctive period of training, not sitting in a meeting, but actually hands-on training. And these are open at any time. So there's a rolling submission. We'll consider these as they come in, but network membership is a prerequisite. So again, another good reason to join the network. And these finally are our contact details. We have our Twitter handle there, and very easy to find us on the web. So just put in Bactivac, it will come up very quickly on the internet. And with that, I think I've completed just less than half an hour I said I'd go for. I'll be very happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Carl. That was great, really informative. And as you were talking, I realised that all the things you're trying to do with Bactivac really recapitulate, in some sense, as your own career, in the sense that I've known you at different stages in research in Europe, in research in Africa, in pharma, in big foundations. You work with the Gates Foundation, and now you're running a network which is also a funder itself. So all the different components of Bactivac in many ways recapitulate, I think, what you've done in your own career, which is quite interesting. I was checking the Q&A. There are a couple coming in. Let me just ask you one, though, while you check those, because I was interested. I mean, this was a question you asked us some years ago when I was on an advisory group to something you were involved in. What would you see as the big couple of most obvious targets, as it were, if you try and weigh up need in terms of morbidity and mortality versus opportunity in terms of good preclinical leads, what would you say as the most, as it were, promising opportunities for new antibacterial vaccines over the next few years?
I think you're gonna hit a little bit of bias from me on that one, as someone who's been very much in the enteric and viral diseases space. But I think that a key one is Salmonella, and this is a slightly tricky one, because I think conceptually, when one talks about Salmonella, the immediate focus we have for those of us who've been to medical school or elsewhere is typhoid. But as you very well know, Kevin, in Africa, the biggest problem is invasive non-typhoidal Salmonella disease, and that's been good to be able to make progress with that, but it's been frustrating the speed at which vaccines have gone there, have been developed against that disease compared with those against typhoid. And we now have 2 pre-qualified typhoid vaccines, but there's only one vaccine against non-typhoidal Salmonella that's currently in clinical trials. So I think that's in the enterics, a broad global Salmonella vaccine is something that I think is a real need, and particularly for Africa. I feel that Africa is being let down in a way by the focus on typhoid vaccines, and solely going towards that, as opposed to the bigger picture with invasive non-typhoidal Salmonella, but also dirogenic Salmonella, non-typhoidal Salmonella disease as well. In the enteric space as well, Shigella is a huge one. So Shigella is the leading cause of death from diarrhea that doesn't currently have a vaccine. Rotavirus has been the leader, but there are rotavirus vaccines, and they're being rolled out. So I think those 2 on the diarrhea front are key ones. And then I think otherwise, as you move to other areas, Group A strep has been one that's been hugely neglected. Doesn't cause a big problem in high-income countries, but there's still a huge burden from rheumatic heart disease, which results from Group A strep disease. And again, this is a problem that's really very much in low middle-income countries and certain indigenous populations in Africa, in Australia and New Zealand. And Group B strep as well, although I know a lot of work's being done on Group B strep, but that's a big one in terms of neonatal mortality. So I think those are probably the big ones that I'd focus on at the moment, and perhaps one other one, another cause of bacteremia. And I know from in Kalifi, you had the seminal paper on bacteremia in New England Journal in 2005. Staph aureus as a cause of, again, blood culture morbidity and mortality. So those, I think, would be the big 5 I would currently see.
Great, thanks. So let me encourage everyone to put any questions into the Q&A. I see you've got one there to answer, Cal, anyway. And I see, Susan Gichogo, you have your hand up. If it's a question, can you put it into the Q&A? Because I don't think we can activate everyone to speak. So anyone with questions, please write them into the Q&A. So Cal, I'll leave you to answer the one that I can already see there.
That's right. I can just see, I don't know if I can't, all I can see is remember to put any questions into Q&A. So I don't know if
no. So if you press Q&A, you can see there's one from Cornelius. It says,
sorry.
Do you consider veterinary bacterial vaccines? Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. Sorry. I'm too used to Teams and not enough to Zoom. Yeah. Veterinary bacterial vaccines, absolutely. And I didn't mention this, and that was perhaps remiss of me on this presentation. I think if I'd spend a little bit more time on the structure of the organization and the management oversight board, you'd be aware that there are members that we have of that from the veterinary community. We absolutely do consider veterinary bacterial vaccines as well. And this is something, again, that we would like to see enlarged. I think a One Health approach is really important, and we have awarded funding for a number of veterinary bacterial vaccines. There is the International Vet Vaccine Association as well, a network as well. We work together with them, but we do award funding to veterinary vaccines too, particularly if there is a sort of overlap with human health as well, but not necessarily. So we've been awarding funding for vaccines against bacterial infections of fish, which have nothing to do with humans, but are very important in terms of maintaining food supplies, food sources in LMICS. So thanks for that question.
Okay, great. And I'm told that I gave wrong information previously when I said that people couldn't speak. In fact, they can speak because Charles or Wycliffe can unmute people. So if you would prefer to ask a question direct rather than write it down, just use the raise hand function, and you will be unmuted so that you can speak directly.
Okay.
If that's how if you prefer to ask a question that way. I see there is another question.
Yes.
It's actually looking for coverage. Perhaps you could address how you can help link people up, Carol.
Absolutely. So this is, I really like this question because I think this really strikes at the heart of the network and why we exist. So this is from a bioinformatician, Javon Akendo from University of Cape Town. And the question is, I'm looking for potential collaborators where my skills can add value in their research work. Bioinformatics is really important in terms of understanding the diseases that we're looking at. And so this is one of the reasons why we want to have a network where people with skills such as yours can be combined with skills from other people. So please do join the network. I think one of the ways that we do a lot of our networking is through the annual network meeting. That's going to be more difficult this year because it's online, but I would encourage you to join the network and to join that. And then either look through the network directory in terms of people, or it would be very possible for us to put a call out for you to our network to say, look, you know, we have this new member, they're a bioinformatician, would people like to link up with you? So I think a number of different ways there, but this is exactly what a network such as ours is about. So we don't need people who are just solely 100% vaccinologists. We need people with the complementary skills that are required to move vaccines along.
Great, thanks. And if I can ask you another one, but also encourage any of our participants to not be too quiet. Do either put your hand up and ask a question direct, or write it into the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. Carol, one of the things, I mean, I think this emphasis on early stage development is something which chimes really well with what we also in AISA have been thinking a lot about recently. And that in turn, it sort of leads into the issue of manufacturing vaccines. You know, this has become really evident during the current pandemic, the absence, as it were, of a vaccine industry on the continent, not almost total absence, not quite complete absence. And these two are intimately linked, obviously. You know, the absence of a preclinical research for facilities widely across the continent and the absence of, as it were, large-scale manufacturing are obviously linked. I mean, it's in a way, it's a too big a problem for any of us to tackle individually. But I wonder, are there any things which you feel, you've clearly got a lot of pharma involved in the network, are there any active plans on that front, as it were? You know, the issue of why aren't we making vaccines on the continent?
That's a really good question, Kevin, and it's something that I think we're all acutely aware of who've worked in vaccine industry, and it's a big contrast, say, with the situation in India, in Asia, where there are a huge number. It's great to have Jeanette Wilson from Biovac from Cape Town in the Network Management Oversight Board, and I think you'll be aware of a couple of other places where vaccines are being produced, but not that's being talked about in some of Big Pharma as well. You'll know very well about, from your time on the Scientific Advisory Committee of the NVGH, Novartis Vaccines Institute for Global Health, that that was based in Siena as opposed to in a developing country, partly at that time because of the lack of the difficulty in making vaccines in isolation. So I think it is something that's going to require a lot of investment, because it's just so difficult to sort of have an institute in isolation. But I think it's something that's really important, and I think in terms of sustainability, in terms of making sure that there are vaccines that are produced in the region, in the continent, that's going to be really important going forward. It would be fantastic, with COVID, and obviously this isn't a bacterial disease, if there was a facility to produce COVID vaccines in Africa. We're all very aware how Africa has had a very poor deal in terms of getting vaccines against COVID. That's partly being mitigated by COVAX, but compared to where we are in the UK, it's very low. So I think this is something that I hope in my lifetime will be changing. I hope a lot quicker than that will be changing, but it's not going to be a small feat to achieve.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is a real challenge. You can't just set it up sort of in one place. But on the other hand, things have to begin somewhere. So yeah, it's a real challenge. So I'm just checking for the hands, and I'm not actually seeing any hands waiting. And I'm not seeing, I think, any more questions in the Q&A. I do see that Joanna's wrote a note, which is encouraging, which says, great to, oh yeah, there's actually been an application for membership from a participant of the webinar. So in one sense, the webinar has achieved at least one of its aims. And any other people who are on the call who are not members, do encourage you to join for the reasons that have been clear. And then there's a question there from Cornelius Cal saying, is there a fee to join?
Yeah, no, well, thank you for that question, and categorically no, there's absolutely no fee to join. So that again is one of the advantages of the network, that we've had funding to set ourselves up. So please do join. All it takes is filling out the online form, and our team then gives that a quick check over that that you're a bona fide person who has an interest in this area, and you'll be accepted to the network. So please do apply, and if I could just encourage you as well to let your other members of your networks know about this as well. It would be fantastic if we were, instead of having just under 50% of our membership from low middle income countries, we had over 50%. That would be great. And although it is a year off, just a plug that we very much plan to hold our annual network meeting in 2022 in Africa. This is something from the outset I have thought is absolutely vital that we do. It may be just as much a benefit for those from high income countries who were involved in vaccinology, who've never been to the places where some of the vaccines they're developing are going to have the most use. But also, I think just from the low middle income countryside as well, it's really important that we have an annual meeting in such a country. I think great. That was just a reply from Cornelius.
Yeah. So I'm going to, a bit like an auctioneer at the end of an auction, I'm going to give people a last chance to either raise their hand or to type in a question to Carol. And if there aren't any, we will wrap up. There's never any point, especially in these days of Zoom, when we spend too much time on Zoom and webinars and things, there's certainly no need to go on longer than demand. So I'm just giving a couple of minutes in case anyone's
and then I just hope that, I think this is going to be made available online as well on the African Academy of Sciences website. And if you have other queries as well, then please do feel free to reach out and email us at our contacts email address as well.
Absolutely. And although it may seem very unfair to pick out individual attendees, because in fact I see quite a lot of names of people I know, and I'm delighted they joined, I've just noticed that my colleague and friend Tobias Chewa, who is director of one of the Deltas programs, is online. So particularly pleased to see you there, Tobias. But I'm pleased to see all the attendees. I don't see any further
I do
questions.
see something actually in the in the chat.
Actually. Oh, there is. Yes, some people are using the chat. Yeah,
Dari has messaged. So if I just read this out, to follow up on Kevin's question: is governance and political goodwill a bottleneck to even kickstart in African continent vaccine self-sufficiency process? If what was witnessed at WTO last week, where some high-income countries vetoed the request waiving IP for mass production of COVID vaccines. Ondari, very good question. It's a really tricky one. I think if we look back in history, particularly with thinking of antiretrovirals, the generic antiretrovirals, and those being possible around just in the early 2000s, when industry at the start had not wanted to waive their royalties. That was a good example where a change did happen there. But the governance and political goodwill, I think there is actually a huge amount of governance and political goodwill towards making sure that vaccines are available globally. We're aware that obviously isn't something that's happened outright, but just working in the Gates Foundation right at the start of the pandemic, one of the first things we were aware of that there was going to be inequality in vaccine distribution with COVID. That's why COVAX was set up straight away. That's why there was funding put into setting up new facilities and developing country vaccine manufacturers to make sure that COVID vaccine could be produced in those settings as well. I should just mention the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine, which is from my institute in Oxford, the Jenner Institute. I'm not sure if you're aware, but that is being marketed at cost during the pandemic and sold at cost. In terms of sales going forward for low and middle income countries, that will be provided in perpetuity at cost as well. So that was a deal that was made very early on during the development process. So I think there's perhaps a mixture there. I'm not aware that some of the other manufacturers are taking a similar stance, and I wasn't aware of the World Trade Organization situation in terms of waiving IP, but certainly for the IP of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, that is something that has happened, and that vaccine's been produced in a number of sites, not least of which the Serum Institute of India, which I think those of you in vaccinology will be aware is the biggest producer of vaccines globally. Kevin, anything that you want to add onto that?
No, not really. I mean, I think, as you say, it's a great question. And I think, as you indicate, it's a mixed picture. I think there is a lot of goodwill, a lot of people working towards it, but goodwill, isn't enough. There has to be real action. Last week, didn't show the same level of goodwill. I suppose this is sadly inevitable in all these areas where there's massive commercial and national interests. So I think we are in a mixed picture. There is a big push, which is great, and we should all support it, for equity in both vaccine distribution and vaccine production. But there's quite a way to go, actually, I think. And I think the example of the Serum Institute of India is a great one. I mean, I think it is wonderful that such a massive vaccine producer is in India, and we look forward to the day when you can say the same about vaccine production in Africa.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Kevin, and the African Academy of Sciences for organising this. To Charles and Wycliffe, who've helped with the running of the webinar this morning. As mentioned, I gather this will be on the AAS website soon. So if anyone else wants to see it, or if you want to check up on things that I've said, that will be there. But I'd just like to thank you all for giving me the opportunity of telling you about Bactivac, the Bacterial Vaccinology Network, and once again encourage you to join. So thank you very much for making time. Goodbye.
Great. Thanks, Callan. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you.